Sandra Dee debuted on screen too young with a clear face, innocent eyes, and a grin that convinced America she was the quintessential good girl. Sandra Dee became Hollywood's biggest teenage star in a few years. Late 1950s. Her name on movie posters, magazine covers, and people wanted to believe in pure idealistic dreams. But underlying that the clean, sanitized picture was a different person. Little girl ruled from childhood, deprived of the right to grow up as a normal person, and forced into a suffocating clean mold that stopped her breathing. Hollywood used Sandra Dee's ability that warped and slowly shattered her self-identity. While on TV, viewers loved her purity. In real life, she suffered from terror, eating disorders, identity conflicts, and prolonged depression. Sandra Dee did possess talent. She acted naturally and with emotion, a remarkable ability to show vulnerability so young. But that very vulnerability killed an industry that never stopped. Fame arrived too soon, but ability to defend herself never developed. As the lights dimmed, a frigid emptiness replaced glory. Sandra Dee's story goes beyond a star who rose too soon and faded too quickly. The cost-off excellence. The story of a girl who lost herself when the world loved her. The safety that Sandra Dee was familiar with Hollywood from childhood, before movie sets and bright lighting. Born 1942 beyond, New Jersey as Alexandra Zuck, Sandra grew up in a home that broke quickly. Her parents split when she was little, and her world narrowed around her mother, Mary Zuck. Both offer-located, lived, and worked together. Both major and minor nobody discussed decisions. Sandra obeyed them. Had become a habit before she understood she could have chosen differently. Not just her scheduled using one-way logic. So did money. Photos, advertising contracts, modeling fees. Mary Zuck handled everything. Sandra failed that nobody taught her how to make her own money. Money was not a reward for work for a child. Unclear current. It existed, but she did not own it, having any say. Large quantities were discussed by grown-ups. Costs were planned ahead. Sandra realized that her worth was based on a contract number, yet right to use the numbers was elsewhere. The economic pillar position developed gradually without ever have to be named. It was more than work. It justified keep moving, embrace a hard schedule, and stay silent through tiredness. A youngster becomes the main source of income, care, and control blur. That structure makes compliance more than a personality trait. It keeps the machine operating and prevents the mother-daughter connection from being forced. Renegotiating power. By age 4 or 5, Sandra started working. Hours meant for play. She kept smiling for the camera until grown-ups arrived. Satisfied. She stood still while her clothing was streamlined. A shot followed another. Some days concluded in hotel rooms without friends at night. Only tutoring and tomorrow's schedule. Revenue came steadily, but not consistently. With choice. Sandra was praised for following orders. Correctly. Evenings concluded in hotel rooms with tomorrow's schedule placed on the table before she could remove her shoes. In those no loud, spectacular incident marked a stolen childhood. Everything was quieter. Uncommon privacy, undefined limits. Sandra never talked about her stepfather's abuse until years later. Silence to continue daily life. Silence to avoid work be stopped. Long silence allowed a youngster to separate what happened at night from her morning duties. While doing so, her body changed. Closely watched. Tighter dress seams were made. Camera angles were discussed to avoid revealing too much. Her face was lit to show. Retain the essential fragility. Sandra deciphered these signals without words. Her body was nothers alone. It was part of a frame that needed proportion. Sandra Dee was famous before she understood it. New York had seen a blonde, slim girl in the early 1950s that feature frequently in adverts. Silence. No controversy. Just reliable fashion industry presence. There was steady work. One shot after another. Sandra spent more time filming than playing. In 1956, before she had even in her teens, she made $75,000, a number that commands adult respect and denies children the ability to slow down. Professional children's school wasn't a traditional school. Their schedule wasn't centered on contract-related topics. The class schedule revolved around photo ops. Tests were moved to accommodate filming. Teachers were used to mid-class dismissals, in instruction to attend castings and return as part of education. Sandra sat in class alongside adult timid children. You were not asked about the weekend. Question after question. Where are you going this week? Where are you shooting? Who is taking you? Knowledge wasn't key. Flexibility was. School taught you how to keep for Sandra. That meant keeping up with the machine rather than living independently, where normal was redefined too early. Friends were relationships formed with faces that varied with each initiative, not neighborhoods or playgrounds. It evaporated fast like production cycles, at enough time to bond, but never enough to grieve. Childhood wasn't cut off. It was layered till just the timetable ran nicely. No one asked if a child was. They merely wanted to know if she could face the camera tomorrow. The pressure was off. Number of hours in body, weight watched, shape discussed. Eating was no longer natural as meals were cut to fit the appearance. Every meal was a secret negotiation between the body and the job. Staying light meant maintaining roles, contracts, and work rhythm on busy days. Shooting schedules made missing meals common. Method to maintain her only control, her body. Since schedules, appearance, and decisions were set by others, shrinking became a survival reflex. Disappear, but to fit more snugly within the required framed in one really distinguished discipline from self-punishment. The body shrank on its own. In a world where hunger became a form of servitude when goodness was rewarded. Quiet enough to go unnamed, but deep enough to last. No prizes or nominations for endurance or a slowly aging body. Down. The following contract determined success by whether Sandra Dee, but she kept being called, and she learned the key to survival early on. Her appearance had to fit expectations. When Hollywood opened its doors, Sandra entered with a habit, not a dream. Hollywood did not wait for her to learn to undercut herself. Until They Sail by Robert Weiss in 1957 helped Sandra Dee grow up. Sandra's name appeared in the first industry screenings of modeling in movie theaters. Very specific. This face may be in numerous films for different reasons. Various audiences without forcing anyone to back down. Office chaos. But it showed Sandra could be a face delicate enough to adapt, pure enough to not worry, young enough for several years. Later that year, the Golden Globe Sandra became a star after receiving the award for New Star of the Year. The press created a familiar story about her. A matured Shirley Temple's name spread swiftly through publications, marketing, and Sandra's image was shaped by one role. Growing up safe within an image track, being an adult, but never confusing the public. The Universal contract that followed did it unlock studio gates and a new lifestyle. Filming schedules were created. Universal arranged housing, automobiles, and press appearances that signed Sandra Dee to manage an image. Not just an employment contract at final studio system type. Still at full capacity, stars were more than just show-ups. The star assets were planned by quarter, year, and release cycle. Publicity and shooting schedules were closely related. Photos, interviews, private life narratives were edited to provide a continuous, present feeling that Sandra's life was a manufacturing line. As the public expected, photo sessions were used to promote films and preserve icons. Interviews focused on her consistency, goodness, likability, and non-disruptiveness. She became a brand with her clothes, haircuts, and public appearance. A personal choice. Growing up was not natural in that structure. It has to be stable. When a face sold, the studio's duty was to provide a specific feeling, not maturity. Maintain that feeling. The contract didn't need a clause. The schedule, publicity campaigns, and the positions chosen reiterated the same message. Stay profitable. Sandra entered into a system where the individual owned little. Everything operated smoothly. Because of that, there was little room for the friction a young person needs to shape herself. Contracts, appearances, media coverage, every job was picked to maintain the image, not confuse or grow. Distort, not to change the rhythm. It appeared to climb steadily. Internal emotional growth halted under studio lighting. Sandra Dee was not just a new talent in the late 1950s. A best-selling template had to be retained so the system could continue to rely on it for years. In 1959 hit Like a Brick. Universal had more than a smash with Imitation of Life. It was the studio's most successful box office, reaching $50 million. Release. Theaters were packed. Press hammered her name. Sandra Dee wasn't the spotlight in promotional photos, but she was the theater's emotional focus. A young face linked to purity in a story of race, class, and family struggle. Hollywood spotted a pattern. Place innocence next to tragedy and let the audience anchors to that smile. Almost simultaneously, Gig arrived and introduced the beach girl. Youthful, bright, non-threatening, never disturbing. The picture succeeded. Established an icon. Sandra was no longer a young actress designed for an energetic, adorable American teenage girl. Without shadows, the beach movie genre evolved, and Sandra Dee's face became one of its earliest blueprints. A Summer Place pushed that wave higher. Box office skyrocketed. Soundtrack became a classic melody. The film associated Sandra with a softened image. Romantic world where pure beauty masked adult conflicts. Youth audiences understood what to expect from her posters. Get reassurance, not shock or upheaval. After 3 films and 3 symbol layers, an equation was created. Sandra Dee symbolized innocence. No sexuality, no insurrection, no risk. It became an industrial identity. Theaters were packed. Her name appeared on posters, entertainment pages, and rankings. Most individuals never studied, but everyone remembered correctly. Everything flowed flawlessly, leaving no space for deviance. A familiar image became a certainty. Face becomes a guarantee, and every slightest modification is risky. Sandra was maintained at the top by the continuous rhythm. America recognized her by one feeling: innocent, nice. That feeling became reflexive after repeated enough times. From then on, any thoughts of a more complex, mature, troubled Sandra faded, because it didn't exist, but because it didn't suit the selling frame. The doors ahead appeared fine, open, however, each led back to the same room. No caution signs, only a path painted so well that someone would forget they were inside a pre-measured limit. The system lost rhythm. Universal did not renew. The contract terminated without a ceremony, and scripts stopped arriving. Same regularity. A once guaranteed face was forced to go seeking for a spot where she might still be the proper image. Sandra continued filming into the early 1960s. Black Portraits Romeo and Juliet, Tammy Tell Me True opened in theaters. She remained one of America's top 10 box office stars. Posters still featured her. On paper, preview screenings were positive. Were steady years. Precisely what every studio wanted from a proven young star. Her internal rhythm changed, but her roles demanded the same feeling: young, lovely, unthreatening. Sandra did not draw crowds. They met their familiar image in each new flick, an invisible contract between her and the public. Stay where you are. The body couldn't stay in adolescent time. Work was taking over. Long shooting days. Maintaining her figure became a work. Fatigue was never in press releases, but was in photos. Daily routine. Less sleep, stricter food management, timetable with no empty places. Producers repeated old questions. Would this role protect Sandra Dee? Not personally. But Sandra in communal memory. Every script was read for quality and disruption. Sharper-edged roles rarely left the reading table. Her personal life began to mirror the image, which was too valuable to disturb. Working pace. Her early marriage to Bobby Darin provided another element, scheduling on top of a closed calendar. Everything revolved around maintaining a young image in public. Young women faced enormous human constraints. The society wanted to see a girl who never as they matured. The misalignment accumulated. Sandra was pure on screen and rhythmic off. Life had changed, and celebrity became more than just a possibility. Lever. It became a restricting force, holding a picture. The tempo slowed in the mid-1960s as the real person could no longer stand still. Not noisily or immediately collapse, but by tiny signs that the old frame no longer worked for projects like I'd Rather Be Rich. That strange notion that a man could die still carried a familiar star, yet the impression of assurance no longer sparked the same reflex as years ago. Taste was changing. Youth on screen looked sharper, more unsteady, disobedient, and the quality that had once protected Sandra behind the scenes. Weariness could no longer be hidden or buried as neatly as previously. Repeating roles caused each new project feel like returning to the same room. When Universal declined to try a different beat, renewing the contract was more than an economic decision. It signaled the system's desire for a younger, more current, safe face to replace her. Meanwhile, Hollywood was developing inside. The studio system once fostered and controlled stars gave way to new directors and performers. By the late 1960s, Hollywood had sharper, rawer, more willing faces, tones, and visuals, screen instability, sexuality, and rebellion. Young audiences know they sought non-obedient characters and tales. Sandra Dee's safe image softened in that climate. Her greatest asset lost value, not because she lacked talent. Taste shifted toward faces willing to carry conflict, anguish. Hollywood's makeover didn't erase the past in one shot. Old images fell out of rhythm, causing motion. As cinema celebrated instability as truth. The immaculate, pristine frame Sandra carried no longer fit the new way tales were delivered. In that transition, there was little space left for stars built to make no one uncomfortable. Sandra spoke for the first time not loudly about the good girl image's suffocation revolt, but late admission. That frame no longer accommodated the expanding individual. The remarks came at a tough time. When a picture has been too long attached, removing it becomes a public concern. Sandra Dee did not return to the studio system after leaving it, disappear immediately. She tried to adjust the tempo with subtle choices, not noisy image flips, but carefully testing if Sandra could fit. The Dinnick tragedy 1970 was the clearest clue to that attempt. Supernatural fear darkened and adultized her on TV. Sandra's pure smile was less important, seemed more guarded, constrained, and unprotected by the familiar image. That changes boundaries. She refused naked sequences for personal reasons, as late 1960s Hollywood became more open rather than performative moralism. The decision seemed more like a survival reaction. When a profession is predicated on bodily control, keeping even a little fraction of the right to decide becomes one off little protection remaining. Yet in a market that prioritized faces willing to shed skin more drastically, controlled change was without repositioning her. Sandra appeared on TV, sporadically, not like a box office star. Center. Each return showed that she was still working, but not in the main current. System did not collapse, but rather faded a national image to marginal roles, commercial certainty to irregular chances. At this stage, the effort to flee the emblem was already evident. But when it had once powered a career, going outside was personal, artistic, and demanded a system that recognizes Sandra Dee as a moving human, that safe reminiscence of a past period. In that overlap, Sandra stood in an awkward situation. Hollywood required a different image, but given room to change on screen. But what would later be incorporated into Dream Lovers started earlier than the ultimate calm years, when Sandra was still that girl. When a love story was supposed to allow private life, instead healed old wounds. Sandra Dee and Bobby Darin met on a summer place. They were in Hollywood's ideal moment. Young, famous, and placed at the center of a visual frenzy that prevented everyone from slowing down. Two regular folks met in a location where every glance was planned, every smile was anticipated, and every choice was made. Bobby started the connection with early death awareness shapes life rhythm. Childhood heart disease, meaning he never lived, as if time could be delayed. Life and success had to be swift. Bobby's love couldn't wait. That was more than emotion. It proved he was alive. Sandra was 18 and had never loved before. Bobby was completely independent as an adult. Sandra saw an escape. Not just a renowned man that belonged to her, no longer determined by her mother, contracts, or the good girl image since adolescence. The connection moved rapidly, not just because of feeling. Both required it to escape systems. Marrying was urgent, but it also had a weight. Sandra rarely chose something for herself. The press packaged their wedding, even if the cost was unknown. Modern fairy tale with two young, gorgeous, successful faces, a Hollywood golden pair. The public saw romance and two icons together that called it destiny. Yet inside were two people with totally different emotions, needs. Married before learning how to live. Sandra became a married without ever having governed herself, set limits, and protected what was marriage, not refuge. Eventually exposed her most vulnerable, became the location where past injuries resurfaced. They become reflexes, unfounded concerns. Name. They could sense from afar, but couldn't express. Sandra became pregnant and gave birth in 1961. But the season was short, slower rhythm. Work schedule was dense. Image pressure was prevalent. Body had to heal biologically and commercially, while preserving an image. Medication became part of daily life as part of the machine. Pills to keep energy, tablets to maintain the figure, pills to appear unchanged. Gradually, the line between the body became a battlefield as medical support and dependence merged. Daily miscarriages that clashed job, image, and biology losses occurred in private, without public narrative, grief rituals, or space to stop, silence, as if the body were not participating or enduring. Repeated biological and mental shocks created shame without effort that her body was betraying her, that she was inadequate, and that something inside was wrong. Medication helped people turn up. Alcohol and medications followed. Those ideas were never voiced, but they helped them forget what was lost. Depression worsened. Alcohol and drugs no longer helped. Work became a way to avoid loss. Childhood memories did not remain silent, act quietly in how Sandra entered every relationship, allowed people close, and the harm that occurred when intimacy touched her unsafe body made her withdraw. She had multiple incidents in her family when she was little, destroyed her sense of self-formation, that her body belonged to her, that personal limits would be respected. When anguish was spoken, an adult would support her. Truth is silenced when words are unprotected. That lesson traveling quietly with a person throughout maturity, altering their worldview, love, and they treat themselves. Adult intimacy is no longer just a place to the body becomes both loved and terrified when close. Once violated, controlled becomes a place of danger, hard to stay inside for long. Closeness can recall past feelings without vivid memories. Reflex, stiffness, withdrawal, emotional detachment, as if marriage triggers the body's protection system before the intellect realizes. Not as a complete story, but as distance, moments when why intimacy becomes unpleasant is inexplicable, that continual need for reassurance. Not because love is lacking, dangerous even when there is no evident threat. Bobby entered this marriage without the right safety basis, that language, or experience to acknowledge. His decades-long tragedy see instability, but not its cause. He had fractures. Own a fast-paced life, constant death awareness, a way of life-loving that moved forward. Two injured folks, different approaches in the same environment do not automatically heal. Purposely, but their unhealed areas kept contacting. Misunderstanding, every breathlessness, every time one could not stay long enough for the other. Disagreements between two hurting parties, not only spouses. Love was inside the area. Two, even if true, couldn't compensate for Sandra's years of mute survival. Marriage did not generate perseverance, pushing her body and emotions aside for others. Trauma, but it exposed it so it could no longer hide. And that more than any quarrel weighed down the connection. Bobby lived fast, night shows, Vegas, a thick social life. A body educated to exceed limits. Sandra grew. Decreasing energy, depression, a need for presence, a kind of steadiness Bobby's schedule couldn't supply. Sandra's marriage merely strengthened the mother-daughter bond. Regular phone conversations and small decisions continued. Schedules, public appearances, and everyday life arrangement came from outside the marriage. Not loud, but the couple's property had a third voice, only often enough to tell Sandra she had never been alone in the new building. Sandra never totally left the old framework, creating another issued layer of tension when Bobby was both a spouse and outside a mother-daughter. Relationship was never clear. Divorce did not happen overnight. It arose from losing love and psychological competence. To stay put. Losing the strength to hold the picture, family, and a dilemma emerged after the divorce. Of them became emotionally closer. Legal distance allowed words. For Sandra, it was the chance to speak forgotten things. First time she shared childhood memories. Divorce was not just an ending. It was a rare chance to speak the truth. Bobby died at 37 from cardiac issues. Sandra, you lost the first person who had ever felt like leaving. From the original control. Impartial but important bond. Emotional history of her life. Alcohol reappeared more after that death. Eating problems worsened. Isolation increased. One person who had shared that particular history. Unclosed memories began to consume him. More space now. Sandra Dee left Hollywood's operating room. Rhythm. Silence was a state, not a choice. No more calls to book her time or photo sessions maintain a picture in public memory. There was no official goodbye, only a growing void to ordinary life without film sets flattening the body expanded after being compressed. That was no longer sustainable. Eating disorders, alcoholism, and weariness were no longer protected by a schedule, roles, or an image. Staying with herself was inevitable. Lost, 1983. Her latter life would continue in the same rhythm as her cinematic exit, the moment to realize a once national icon was increasingly living in the shadows that in subsequent years, her life and social space shrank. Connections weakened. Old wounds didn't need provocation. Each day passed slowly, heavily, with little escape. No mechanism existed to maintain the tempo or postpone passion. In 1994, Dream Lovers was not a comeback, but a late act of recovering the right to relate the narrative without shock or correction in image, but to put what was kept into words for the first time. Silence. Sandra's story wasn't about career rebuilding, but reconstructing memories, abuse, eating disorders, alcoholism, nameless losses, marriage voids, and things set aside. The machine might keep going. The book did not lighten the past, that it changed history from an unseen entity influencing everything that became something viewed directly. Not to heal, but to stop being. Sandra Dee's latter years were quiet. Return shape, lengthy encounter, kidney failure, physical weakening, biological effects of years of unreversible self-eroding stage, cinema set, mechanism to protect her. Only a body with too much history, control, silence, forbearance, and subtending to others. The 2005 death of Sandra Dee was not cultural but an communal frame or halt for a civilization to cease look back. Her death did not spark introspection that disrupt entertainment, did not force her image-building system to examine itself. The news appeared then faded, much like her career had done years ago. Not because she had never been part of national memory, because that image was frozen at a separate time. When the real person left that frame, the society had no language to accept her. No major television program dedicated an hour to her life after her death. No tribute night, no surge of film replays on the large networks. Sandra Dee was briefly mentioned in the news. There was no time to end her story while other entertainment stories continued. Only a constricted life that ended in the same way, no longer central, no longer rhythmic, longer under the spotlight, and almost out of popular culture's memory. Sandra Dee is iconized as the innocent girl, ideal American teenager. The face that never made anyone uncomfortable, safe enough for an entire era to trust. But Sandra wasn't their icon. Sandra lived in an early controlled body, a childhood that was never protected, in a profession based on conforming to others. Sandra experienced relationships when love could not heal untreated scars. Dee's legacy goes beyond movies and visuals. Paradox. A woman seen weekly by all of America, yet rarely considered as a Sandra Dee, didn't collapse instantly through each job that required the same image, regulated meal, and silence need to keep things flowing through each loss that was never allowed to halt. Grief was that she was never an icon, not being one. And possibly in everything that remained after when the lights went out, Sandra Dee's narrative was more than a starred narrative of a youngster shown on stage too early and never given another chance, enough space to walk away as a normal person.